On the 18th of November 1531, a Florentine banker named Roberto di Ridolfi was born, a man whose name would one day be linked to one of the boldest and most dangerous conspiracies against Queen Elizabeth I. He wasn't a soldier nor a courtier. He was, by all accounts, intelligent, charming and ambitious, a banker by trade, a Catholic by faith, and in the 1570s, a man who believed that money and influence could change the destiny of kingdoms. I'm author and historian Claire Ridgway, and today I want to revisit the Ridolfi Plot. But rather than retelling it step by step, I want to look at how a Florentine financier found himself at the centre of a plot to depose England's Protestant queen, and how his story tells us something about the fragile world that Elizabeth I ruled in. Roberto di Ridolfi was first and foremost a businessman. He came from a respected Florentine family and was part of that long Italian tradition of merchants and bankers who helped finance Europe's rulers. By the time he settled in London in 1562, England was a risky but lucrative place to do business. Ridolfi dealt with prominent figures, including William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, handling financial transactions for the crown and nobility. He was polished, multilingual and discreet, the kind of man who could dine with courtiers one evening and send coded letters the next. But Ridolfi was also a devout Catholic. The religious tensions tearing through Europe after the Reformation were deeply personal to him. He served as an agent of the papacy, a quiet link between Rome and the Catholic recusants in England. When the Northern Rebellion broke out in 1569, a Catholic uprising against Elizabeth's government, Ridolfi's double life began to unravel. The Pope had asked him to distribute funds to the rebel lords, and when the revolt failed, Ridolfi was arrested and interrogated by Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster. There wasn't enough evidence to convict him. He was released, but the experience didn't frighten him into obedience. It merely taught him how to be more careful. He was convinced that Elizabeth's reign could not last forever. For him, the Protestant queen was an obstacle, not only to Catholic restoration, but to peace between England and the wider Catholic world. So he did what many ambitious men of the age did. He began to plot. By 1571, Ridolfi had transformed himself from banker to conspirator. The plan that would bear his name was breathtaking in scope: to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, and restore Catholicism to England. The Ridolfi Plot wasn't a small circle of disaffected nobles muttering in taverns. It was a full-scale international conspiracy. Ridolfi's network spanned the great Catholic powers of Europe. At its heart were King Philip II of Spain, ruler of the world's most powerful empire, Pope Pius V, who'd excommunicated Elizabeth in 1570, the Duke of Alba, commander of Spain's armies in the Netherlands, John Leslie, Bishop of Ross and Mary, Queen of Scots' tireless agent, Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, England's highest-ranking nobleman, who was to marry Mary and claim the throne beside her. And of course, Mary, Queen of Scots herself, who gave her consent to the plot from captivity. Ridolfi's role was to act as the go-between, the man who could move money, messages and promises across borders under the cover of legitimate business. His banking connections made him invisible to most of Elizabeth's watchmen. He was also convinced, and convincing, enough to persuade some of Europe's most powerful men that a Catholic restoration in England was both possible and imminent. According to the plan, Spanish forces under the Duke of Alba would land in Essex, while a Catholic uprising in the north would seize control from within. Elizabeth would be overthrown, Mary freed, and England returned to the papal fold. It was bold, treacherous, and if it had succeeded, it would have changed history. Ridolfi's confidence came partly from arrogance. He genuinely believed he could charm kings and outsmart governments. But it also came from a dangerous underestimation of Elizabeth's statecraft. For all his diplomacy, Ridolfi did not yet understand the reach of her intelligence network or the sharpness of her chief advisors. And he made one crucial mistake. He talked too much. Ridolfi was proud of his scheme. During his travels, he bragged about it to the Grand Duke of Tuscany, who rather sensibly informed Elizabeth's agents. Meanwhile, in England, her spy master Walsingham and the ever-watchful William Cecil were already tracking rumours of Spanish gold and coded letters. Then came the breakthrough. In April 1571, one of Ridolfi's couriers, Charles Bailey, was caught at Dover carrying letters written in cipher and stuffed into the lining of a bag. Under interrogation and torture, Bailey broke. He revealed the cipher key and confessed the details of the plot. Within months, more evidence surfaced. In August 1571, a London draper named Thomas Brown was asked by one of Norfolk's secretaries to carry a bag north. Brown grew suspicious and handed the bag to Lord Burleigh. Inside were letters and £600 in gold intended to fund the rebellion. It was the final piece of proof that Cecil needed. Norfolk's household was raided, his secretaries arrested, and his home, Howard House, searched from attic to cellar. Hidden among the papers was a ciphered letter from Mary, Queen of Scots herself. There was no longer any doubt. The Duke was implicated. For Norfolk, this was the fatal blow. He'd already promised Elizabeth that he would never again involve himself with Mary, but now here was evidence of treachery in his own handwriting. Ridolfi, meanwhile, was safely in Paris, oblivious to the chaos behind him. When the net finally closed, it was too late for Norfolk. But Ridolfi escaped punishment entirely. The banker who tried to bankroll a rebellion slipped quietly out of England's reach. In December 1571, Norfolk was charged with having conspired and imagined to deprive the Queen of her crown and dignity, to cause rebellion and sedition, to bring in strangers and aliens to invade the realm, and to subvert the government. In plain terms, treason. Norfolk's fall was tragic. He wasn't a zealot or a revolutionary. He was a proud, ambitious noble who made a disastrous gamble. He'd promised Elizabeth that he would steer clear of Mary, Queen of Scots, but his vanity and weakness had pulled him back in. In January 1572, he was found guilty of high treason. Elizabeth hesitated for months before signing the death warrant. She was deeply reluctant to execute the highest peer in England, a man who'd once been a loyal royal servant. But Parliament pressed her hard, arguing that mercy would only encourage further plots. On the 2nd of June 1572, the axe fell on Tower Hill. The Ridolfi Plot had claimed its most prominent victim. The Spanish ambassador was expelled from England, and from that point on, Elizabeth's tolerance of Catholic diplomats and of open Catholic practice narrowed sharply. Ridolfi, meanwhile, was safely abroad, watching from a distance as his grand design unravelled. He'd never picked up a sword or fired a shot, yet his pen and his purse had brought England to the edge of crisis. For Mary, Queen of Scots, the Ridolfi Plot was a disaster. She was already a prisoner, but now she was a proven danger. A queen in name, a threat in practice. Letters in cipher, confessions from her agents, and her own consent to the plan were enough to convince Elizabeth that she could never be trusted. From this moment, Mary's world grew smaller. Her correspondence was restricted, her attendance watched, and her communications monitored by Walsingham's ever-growing spy network. Parliament passed new measures depriving Mary of any right to succeed to the English throne and ruling that if she ever plotted again, she would face trial by English peers. And when news came of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, the slaughter of French Protestants by Catholic forces, English fears of Catholic plots only deepened. The Ridolfi affair had proved how real those threats could be. From now on, Elizabeth's government moved from vigilance to paranoia. The Ridolfi Plot wasn't the end of Catholic conspiracies. It was the beginning of a pattern that would lead to the Throckmorton Plot, the Babington Plot, and ultimately Mary Queen of Scots' execution in 1587. Each plot was more elaborate, more desperate, and more brutally suppressed. And what of Ridolfi himself? He never returned to England. Safely in Paris when the plot was exposed, he fled to Rome, where he continued to serve the papacy as a diplomat and special envoy. His loyalty to the church was unwavering, but he no longer meddled directly in English affairs. Later, he returned to Florence, where he lived out a remarkably long and comfortable life, becoming a senator and serving his native city well into old age. He died in February 1612, aged 80, a natural death, far from the scaffold that had taken many of those who conspired against monarchs. The Ridolfi Plot reminds us that Elizabeth's reign was anything but secure. We tend to look back and see stability, splendour, and the triumph of Gloriana, the golden age. But in the 1560s, 70s, and 80s, Elizabeth's position was precarious. She'd been excommunicated by the Pope. Mary, Queen of Scots, had a strong hereditary claim, and half of Europe saw Elizabeth as a heretic who'd usurped God's order. In that climate, men like Ridolfi saw opportunity. He failed, but his failed plot taught Elizabeth and her ministers something vital, that intelligence, surveillance, and swift response were as powerful as any army. The plot also changed the way that England viewed outsiders. The fact that the conspiracy had been masterminded by an Italian banker fueled distrust of foreign agents and sharpened the edges of Elizabethan nationalism. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of the end for Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots, from captive queen to condemned traitor. Thank you for watching, and I'd love to know what you think. Was Ridolfi a devout crusader, a reckless opportunist, or simply a man caught up in the politics of his age? Do let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss my next Tudor history video. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.